Welcome everyone to the new JFK show number 275. We've got one of our famous and favorite guests, Phil Nelson, author of LBJ, The Mastermind. And Phil Nelson is all over LBJ. If you want the truth, he is the man that's done the dirty work for you. And he's got more to find out. And I've always said that I loved NASA when I was a kid, but they've been disappointing me ever since. So, Phil, I'm going to go ahead and turn the whole show over to you, and we're going to go into it. And how you doing, Dr. Fetzer?
Well, I just wanted to add, as you switch over to Phil being host, that Robert Caro was supposed to be the great historian of Lyndon Johnson. He had like 4 volumes, but when it came to the assassination, he fell apart. He couldn't handle it. And that's where our Phil Nelson comes in and sets a record straight. Caro turned out to be a weakling. It's one of those cases well captured by Jack Nelson and a few good men. Caro can't handle the truth. Phil Nelson can, and he delivers it rapid fire, very thorough, excellent. I commend the book to one and all. Yeah. Phil.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Am I on now?
Yes, you're the host, and you can screen
okay.
share if you like, or you can.
Oh, yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah, this is also the author of the USS, remember the USS Liberty, almost sunk by treason on the high seas. So we've got a heavyweight.
Okay, well, thank you very much, both of you. You've been so kind to me over the years, especially you, Dr. Fetzer. I owe so much to you for supporting me back when I was being attacked from all sides. You helped me watch my back and get through all that, and I appreciate it. I want to just recap a little bit of where I've come from just in the last 3 or 4 months. Well, up until June of this year, I had seen a lot of material, including what you've put out, the videos that you've done, Dr. Fetzer, and you uncovered a lot of reasons to doubt that there were any moon landings whatsoever. And I've watched a lot of other videos, and one of them was called Kubrick's Odyssey: How Stanley Faked the Moon Landing, and that was presented in my first blog on June the 24th, which is right here. And my sub question was, or did LBJ cunningly set the plan to convince the entire US population, 207 million citizens, and the world at that time, about 3.6 billion people, that the USA went to the moon in July of 1969? This piece right here, I'm going to get back to this in just a minute. But when JFK announced the commitment to try to reach the moon by the end of that decade, the 60s decade, that meant by December the 31st of 1969. Well, they beat it by about 2 weeks, but it wasn't on the moon. I'm pretty much convinced now. But at that time, I explained the context of the content and about the point about using the phrase "you decide" in the heading, is that this essay should not be construed as being an endorsement of the overall point, but a reasonably informed, objective summary statement of the scenario. And my humble interpretation presentation, the possible scenario, is just that. That was my little hedging, because I wasn't quite ready, even as late as June the 24th, to acknowledge that the whole thing was a fake. I just threw it out there for people to decide. I looked at the points that I'm about to make here, and it starts with that movie, the Kubrick's Odyssey, and that's a scene from a much longer movie. Now there was a second, also a second video presented below, and then we get into that second video, and this one is concerning. It was making a convincing case for the premise that no human being has ever even been beyond the Earth's orbit, or about 1,000 miles max. whereas the moon is 240,000 plus miles away. So that claim, the claim is made within here that the technical capability to accomplish that task did not exist at that point, when computers were still in their nascent phase and were as big as a house, having only a small fraction of what is now available on a typical personal computer. And that's the thing that I've wondered about for a long time, about how those primitive computers could have possibly done the sophisticated trajectory that had to be
Yeah,
done.
Dennis Casimo. How do you pronounce his name? Dennis Casimo?
Casino,
Kucinich?
Camino.
Yeah, Camino.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, he demonstrated on one of Jim's shows that there was only 600 words of power. You could only store 600 words in these super primitive computers.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah, like I say, that's one of the things that I always question the most. And also, one of the experts interviewed within the video, he was identified only as a NASA astronaut, said that I'd love to go to the moon, but we've lost the technology to do that. Okay, that's at about the 1:30 mark on the video, and it you know, you're aghast at hearing things like that directly from astronauts. At least I was in back in June.
blew me
But
away.
also, there was another book written by the French researcher Laurent Guyano, I think is the way he's pronounced his name, but he's a very interesting guy, and he's addressed a lot of things that, and we communicated about 6 months ago, just before I wrote this thing, actually. And he had written a column that was published in the UN's Review titled "How LBJ Mooned America." That was just December 25th of last year. Yeah, Christmas Day. Within that piece, I'm just going to quote something that was presented by him in that reference. Quote, "It is during Nixon's tenure that men walked on the moon, collected moon rocks, and planted US flags. Parentheses, the last time was in December 1972, almost 50 years ago, in parentheses. But Apollo had really been Johnson's project from the start. This is the point I have boldface. Quote, few people today realize or remember, said Alan Wasser, but a single man, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, is primarily responsible for both starting and ending the space race. Apollo 11 wouldn't have happened without Lyndon Johnson." And there seems to be a broad consensus of that among historians of NASA. Well, so the next piece of that first blog, the June 24th blog, I called it the piece de resistance, first person proof from Buzz Aldrin, the man who purportedly walked on the moon. And this was at the end of that video. And this part of the video, he explains to an 8-year-old girl, who I believe is his granddaughter, but it doesn't say that after a series of admissions and implications of deceit, Buzz Aldrin then explained why they, parentheses, I put in LBJ, evidently decided he had to change the plans midstream when it became obvious that technology simply didn't exist to accomplish JFK's stated mission. So an alternate solution was invented to convince the public that it had been done because the mighty USA had a commitment to make. Apparently Aldrin couldn't, let me adjust this thing. This is going up for it. I forgot to do this.
Yeah, if we can't make it, we're gonna fake it. I've always heard.
Yeah. But here we say, apparently Commander Aldrin couldn't bring himself to repeat the contrived and memorized package story, which he had delivered to many previous audiences, to this child. All in as in a sudden stream of consciousness, admission from someone who might have had a trace of undiagnosed Tourette's syndrome. he evidently spilled out the real story, the secret that he'd been taught to never utter again. And probably thinking that this would come off as just another Aesop fable that was taped. Buzz evidently decided he had to reveal the pure truth to this innocent little girl, who was at an age where one could not generally decipher truth from myth. So for just a few minutes, he must have felt like this child's innocence would protect him from ever repeating it to another. The pure humanity of this inadvertent lapse, apparently tired of repeating all the lies he had been conditioned to uttering, suddenly found himself speaking unvarnished truth to this little girl. And my conclusion after all that was that from all outward appearances, one may deduce that he was revulsed at the very thought of performing his usual duty. Suddenly, he evidently realized he faced the prospect of polluting her innocence with a lie. He simply could not bear to be dishonest with her. After all that, he then announced what it was really all about with the word money. You could almost hear her squeal with delight at the way he became energized suddenly with greater intensity as he proceeded to give her simple economics lessons, which explained in a clear and lucid manner a story that a child of her age could comprehend, which boiled down to this. Aldrin's point to her was about how a lot of money was thrown into solving one of Johnson's most vexing dilemmas in a manner which would have required a complete change in plans, vendors, and a reallocation of expenditures. Aldrin implicitly admitted through his actions post-lunar walk, quote unquote, and his later retirement in support of the myth, that he had also been paid what was probably a personal fortune as his part of the deal. Mm-hmm. So it's a moment where Buzz apparently decided to throw the patented lies to the wind for at least one day, a come to Jesus moment for which he could only muster the purest, most truthful and honest words. That was my post in June the 24th. And then I just let it out there. And again, I resisted the notion of taking and accepting it for 100%. I still was tilted 95% to it being a hoax, but I didn't want to say that in that one. Yeah. Well, I changed my mind in the next two. And that's when we introduce the other, how do I get rid of that? I have to pull this down for a second, just so I can click on that. Okay, so on September 14th, the second blog was published called New Video on Moon Landing Hoax. The son of a guard at film site states that LBJ attended the kickoff of the hoaxed filming event. Now, I'm going to just go ahead and play this video. It's 14 minutes long. Is that going to work, or should I just summarize?
Sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Welcome back to an interrupted new JFK show with Phil Nelson, where we're talking about Lyndon Johnson's role in the moon landing hoax. Because of the hurricane in Florida, Larry was unable to continue. Indeed, we're still concerned about how he's faring. We've had difficulty reaching him, but we want to continue with Phil. We're going to pick it up with a video we began play from the beginning. Gary.
Hello, my name is Gene Gilmore. My birth given name is Eugene Reuben Akers. I don't want any money for what I'm doing because hopefully this video won't come out until after my death. So I have nothing to gain, nothing to profit by telling you what I'm going to tell you. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you is available online until they see this video. And I'm sure things will start getting scrubbed, as well as moon photos. But anyway, my father in 1968 was stationed at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. I made notes on my computer so that I wouldn't forget anything, because there's a lot of little things and stuff that I'd forget. So these notes were made a long time ago. The original recording that my father made on his deathbed was destroyed in a fire. So this is my deathbed confession, because now I'm dying of cancer. I've got cancer all over the place, and they don't know where it's coming from, and I don't know if they can stop it, but it don't look good. So I'm going to go ahead and make this video for Bart Seibel. He knows not to do anything with it until notification of my death, for which my son will respond to that. Okay. Like I said, in 1968, my father was stationed at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. We lived in Clovis, New Mexico. He was in the military police for over 20 years. And on his deathbed in 2002, we made a recording of what happened. Now, I already told you what happened to the recording. But it doesn't matter, because all the facts are there. So it doesn't matter who's telling the story or whatever. I will, at the end of the video, I'll supply a picture of my father, his badge, the flag of when they buried him. I'll show you some photos of my dad. I was born in 1955. So in 1969, I was 14 years old. I vividly remember the Apollo 11 coming down, landing on the moon, they're walking around and all that stuff. Anyway, I never questioned that until my dad told me what he told me on his deathbed. And then I started doing a little, nothing major, nothing, just surfing the web. I think they call it surfing the web. And a lot of that information's right there on the web. I mean, it verifies the story that he told me. A good detective, a good one, would be able to uncover a lot more of the story than I'm getting ready to tell you. So please have at it. I've never known my dad to lie. To get caught lying was worse than whatever it was you did to begin with. I remember going to school with long sleeve shirts on to hide the purple welts. You did not lie in our house, that's for sure. Dad had a really bad attitude towards lying. Excuse me again. Okay, anyway, this is the story that my dad told me on his deathbed. Project Slam Dunk was the name of this. President Johnson in 1968, okay. In Cannon Air Force Base in 1968, he said by the time he got there, that there was already 2 large hangars that were connected. There was hundreds of dump trucks that came in and dumped sand and stone, and cement powder was powdered over the top of all that to make it look like a lunar landscape. They had men that fashioned it into a lunar landscape, he said. Okay, I've never known my dad to lie, so this all took me by surprise. You know, what's that all about? So anyway, he said that in front of the airplane hangars was pole framing with large canvas tents that was concealing the inside of the staging area. Inside the staging area, on flatbed trucks, was created the lunar lander that was reassembled back inside the hangars. All of the walls were painted flat black, and the ceilings as well. He was sworn to secrecy by the NSA, and they would put him in prison for breaking that oath. When Dad saw the moon landing on TV, he cried. He said he knew that what he had witnessed on TV was exactly what they recorded in that hangar. There was no reason for them to go flying around and everything. They had detailed high-definition photos of the landing area. There was no reason for them to go flying around to a different landing area that almost exhausted their fuel, except for drama, because everything had gone so smoothly. Nothing, so it had to be something. Anyway, Dad was one of 3 guards that guarded the inside of the front entrance. There was a list of 15 people who could enter. No one else was allowed by order of President Johnson. And here is that list. And I gave it to Bart Seibel as well. And he checked out a lot of these names, and he says he can verify a lot of these people and what they do. And I come across a couple myself. Anyway, President Johnson, Neil Armstrong, Edwin Alden, Werner von Braun, Robert Emenegger, Gene Kranz, James Webb, Joe Kerwin, Dr. Thomas Paine, Glenn Looney, Dr. Christopher Kraft, Dr. James Van Allen, General Trudeau, Lieutenant Colonel Donald Simon, and Grant Norrie. Now, the only 2 that I really have information on is Robert Emenegger. Apparently, he did a lot of video work and stuff for the Department of Defense. So the DoD did know him, okay? And the other one was Grant Norrie, Norray, I believe, was to the best of my dad's knowledge, was a like some FBI, CIA, NSA, who knows, something like that. Okay, President Johnson only showed up for the first day of filming. Filming lasted for 3 days, and the entire project was restored to original. In other words, the hangars were all taken apart, the sand was all removed, and so on and so forth. Okay. Dad said there was a lot of building going on at the base, so at the time, so sand and cement powder was never questioned. I can see how they could smuggle that all in within everything else that's going on. Since 2002, I have dug up, I already told you about that, the evidence for the moon landing that I have found. If you go to Google and go to Cannon Air Force Base website, they admit that President Johnson was there. The lunar lander was there. The astronauts were there. I also have verified some of the people on the list were there. I also verified there are a lot of building going on in the base, just as he had told me. And all of this was going on at the same time, on the same date. Dad told me all these things, father to son. He also told me not to ever tell anyone what he had said, but he said on his deathbed that he had to tell somebody before he died because it was just too important not to tell. I sure as hell wasn't going to tell anybody. Yeah, I feared for my wife and me and my son, and I'll tell you why. Ever since I contacted Bart Seibel, I think they may be listening to his phone once in a while, because I never had any problems until I contacted him and told him my story. Now, people broke into my house 2 times. I was visited by men with black suits, and I was told in no uncertain terms to drop this whole project, not to say anymore to anybody, or me and my wife and my son could disappear. You take that pretty literally after everything that's going on. Well, so I stopped contacting Bart, and now I'm making this video that I'm going to send to Bart. Mr. Seibel, excuse me. Bart's my brother, man. My brother in heart, my brother in Jesus, okay? Bart, being a good friend that he is, called the police for me and told them about the break-ins. The two detectives that came out and everything questioned me and everything like that, I didn't give them any information at all. At the time, I thought it was a test from them guys in the black suits. I didn't say crap. So all that went away and everything, but it definitely, the two guys in the black suits were not the two detectives that came out to question me about the break-ins. But thanks, Bart. But no, I don't want any help. I just want somebody to pick up where I left off and be able to prove with the information I've given. And I'm trying to give as much as I can because I know that once I die, I'm not going to be able to be asked any questions. So that's why I tried to give you a little backstory too. But that's about all I can think of. My dad, he raised me by the book. I know he didn't lie to me. And as I started seeing more and more of what he was telling me was true, I realized my dad wasn't lying.
I lifted the lid off my dad's case, and you can see that his name is Cyrus Eugene Akers. He was born on July 17th, 1933. He died on September 28th, 2002. Here's his badge, and I wanted to see if I could get as close as possible so that you can read the numbers on the bottom, which are, okay, there it is. Zero 07596. 07596. That's my dad. And it must have been a really early picture because he's only got 2 stripes. So that was back in the 50s, I'm sure. Probably not long after I was born. And there he is. That's my father.
My dad, he raised me by the book. I know he didn't lie to me. And as I started seeing more and more of what he was telling me was true, I realized my dad wasn't lying.
Yeah, looks like the person he wanted to pick up and carry on was you, Phil.
Well, that could be the case, I suppose, because I do believe that he was telling the truth, that Gary Gilmore was telling the truth about his father. And that within the video, he noted the time of this event was stated as June 1st to the 3rd. That's 3 days. The 1st of June of 1968. So I went to the website for the LBJ library and what I call the mausoleum, even though it's technically not correct. It looks like one, if you ever looked at it, to check Johnson's diary for this time period. And in my blog, I attached the pages that I had obtained there and put them into the blog, which can be seen at lbjmasterofdeceit.com. This is the blog that was dated September the 14th. And so I went there to check those references. And I believe that given Johnson's numerous deceitful and treacherous acts and related cover-ups, it is no surprise that there's no mention of his trip to Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico on any of these days. Of course, that had to be hidden. And so I believe he had his accolades doctor up his diary for those 3 days. And if you look closely at the result of that is the diaries themselves, that you'll find that is just full of just inane stuff that he was portrayed to have been involved with. So we're talking about June the 1st. That was the date that his diary indicated that he spent the better part of the day just driving around various people around his ranch in nearby towns, including his daughter Lucy. She was searching for a new roll of camera film, of all things, okay? And it took him 3 stops. They drove around Johnson City stores before she purportedly found one that had her kind of film. So the contrast between such an inane entry, one of the many on that day, compared to others, generally describe more notable events. That is, if you compare the entries on those 3 days to everything else in his diaries, you're not going to find anything quite like this, because the diary entries for that Saturday, June 1st, mostly consisted of arcane references to the exact times he spent driving on Main, quote, this is a quote out of the diary, quote, driving on Main Ranch area, driving east on Ranch 1, through Rocky Creek, and it went on and on like that, or around his ranch. You will find those kinds of comments nowhere else in all of his diaries that I could ever see. And it was a little bit pedantic, you know, for him to be portrayed that way in those 3 days, especially given the general pattern of the entries made. It was more prominent on that day than any other day. Usually you would see more substantive entries about who he met with and what they spoke about. What here, practically the whole day of June 1st was purportedly spent just driving around the ranch and on various roads, meeting neighbors and friends, including his old buddy Judge A.W. Morson for lunch. He went to lunch with Morson. He was a longtime friend and business partner who had eventually terminated that association for mysterious reasons that were never explained. However, the story being told now might have had something to do with it. Now that's just a speculative opinion, but what else could explain that? Lyndon Johnson had a very well documented penchant for deception and cover-ups, and that might explain those ambiguous entries. Because as a cover for several hours, while he left the ranch on the Air Force Jetstar, parked on the runway behind his ranch house, he apparently left for a 90-minute flight. Well, it was 450 miles from his ranch to the Cannon Air Force Base. And so that I estimate that would be somewhere, you know, between, I don't know, 70 or 90 minutes of flight. So he would not have to really spend the whole 3 days up there, the filming. And that's a little bit ambiguous from the film, because Mr. Gilmore only refers to day 1. As we found out later, it looks really like he was there for 3 full days, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, the diary's mention of the dinner guests that evening included his Hollywood friends. Arthur Krim, he was the chairman of one of the big, I think it's United Artists or something. In other words, Arthur Krim, Ed Weissel, and Lou Wasserman. They were some of the top Hollywood producers. What they were supposed to be, that they were named as his guests in his diaries, along with guests Gregory Peck and Henry Ford II. So whatever that means, I don't know.
At the
That
same
was just
time that all this is going on, you had in his diaries as guests 3 Hollywood producers.
Yeah, right. And Gregory Peck is a major Hollywood actor.
Yeah, he's a household name.
And then Henry Ford II. Anyway, that they would have been unaffected by Johnson's possible absence, on that day, And even if they were put in the diary without their knowledge, they would never, really question it, or even if they read it. And I don't think it was even read for some years later, because it was all just put in his diary. It wasn't published immediately. It dribbled out over many years later.
Mhm.
But his presence at Cannon Air Force Base was not even essential for their purposes, except that he was there to make a presence. He wanted all the people there to see him say that you must keep this, airtight. You cannot speak of this to anyone else. Now, I'm sure the Air Force brass who were there had already explained all of that about the penalties to be exacted for anyone with loose lips that might even say a word about this hoax. And given his inability to empathize with others or to tell truths about anything, Johnson would never have been concerned himself about how his orders to keep silent about outrageous actions ruined many lives through the use of the force of government edict to keep such a major fraud secret. That would not have been a concern to him. Now, there are a lot of things said about this or of silence. And I did repeat in this first blog the kind of thing that government authorities were telling people. And I included an example of that as to what the Navy were telling all the survivors, not just the survivors of the USS Liberty attack, but all the ships that were there that came to its rescue, so to speak, even though it took 18 hours. When they finally got there, all of them, every one of the officers and sailors aboard, not just the Liberty, but the other ships, were told by Admiral Isaac Kidd Jr. words that I'm going to repeat here because they were probably essentially the same words that were told to everybody who came into that filming set. What Isaac Kidd Jr. told the USS Liberty survivors after hearing their own stories and telling them that, he was just one of them, and then ultimately putting his admiral face on once more, then he let them all have it. And he did this in groups of 5 or 6 people, sailors. Well, they started with the highest level, the officers on board, and they worked their way down, to tell every one of the survivors and all those guys on the other ships words that I'm going to repeat right here. You might want to put quote marks around it, starting with, quote, "You are never to repeat what you just told me to anyone, not your mother, your father, your wife, anyone, including your shipmates. You're not to discuss this with anyone, and especially not with the media, or you will end up in prison or worse." Whatever is worse than prison, you can use your own imagination. But that's the kind of thing that all of these people would have been told. And so therefore they kept their lips zipped, just as Gene Gilmore's father had kept his lips. And he was the one who was so obsessed with, telling truths and no lies. And this guy appears to me to be a sincere guy who's not there for any purpose other than keeping his, I guess his pledge to his father somehow from his own father's deathbed, the rest of his life, until here he is telling this on his own deathbed. And the guy is obviously sincere, and he's not just making this up. He has no financial purpose, no other reason that he would be saying something like this. So I've talked to a number of people about this, and the people I've talked to all agree that this guy is not just another, screwball putting out some BS. I just think the guy really made a great effort to continue, pursuing the truth that his father had told him, and he did so in this rather plaintive but very passionate film that he went out of his way to make. Anyway,
it just reeks of truth. Just the way, when you make your first video and stuff, he just has that kind of plain look, his gestures. He's just it's like Sam Holland, who was talking on the overpass. He's just so sincere, when he talks about the motorcycle cop running his motorcycle up and he saw the smoke. You can just tell that they're telling the truth.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's exactly the point, Gary, because there's so many people who are out there spreading all kinds of other nonsense, and it's hard to filter out sometimes who is telling the truth and who is very sincere. And this guy has got to be considered very sincere. Mm-hmm. Now, with that, in that first September 14th video, I also made a point about other things that point to this whole thing being a hoax. And one of the most...
Phil, yes. May I intervene?
Sure.
3 or 4 points. Number one, obviously, guy's completely 100% sincere. No question about it. Number two, his father was a military policeman. He may have been responsible for ensuring who entered and who left. Notice he had that very nice list. Number three, that list was the mucky muck. That list wasn't the people who were doing the tech, who were working on the ground, who were moving around the cameras and all that. So there was a much larger staff who were actually carrying all this business out. Right. And then fourth, once they disassembled it, then for future efforts, they would have had to reassemble. We're supposed to have gone to the moon on several different occasions and taken a vast number of photographs and all that. Something he mentioned in passing, by the way, that struck me, he said that they made the ceiling all black. And of course, that was one of the blunders, because if you actually had been on the moon, which is, it has no atmosphere, no moisture, which, by the way, is a tell, because I believe you could no more make imprints on moon dust than you could the sands of the Sahara. So when we have all these moon rover tracks and all that, it's got to be manufactured. It means there was moisture there. You wouldn't have the retention of any tracks. Mm-hmm. Where, by the way, I've done a huge amount on the moon landing, and I can give you proof after proof that everything we've been shown about the moon landing is fake, that it's 100% fake. But the point I'm now making is painting the roof black was a blunder, because on the moon, it would have been ablaze with points of light, billions of points of light. The heavens would have been spectacular. So when they came back and had their first press conference, and the first astronaut to address the question said it was pure black, I mean, that was just absurd, physically anomalous, ridiculous. James Files, of whom we all know, and I had dinner here in Madison, and Files, of course, claims to have been the gunman on the grassy knoll. This is consistent with the House Select Committee that there was a second shooter. Well, Files is playing the role of the second shooter. I'm convinced he knows a whole lot about the assassination, but he wasn't actually the second shooter. He was a designated person to play the role of the second shooter. He does it very, very well. But he said to me twice during our conversation at a steakhouse here where I treated him and his wife, who'd driven up from Chicago, once the government stakes out a position, it's locked in, that it will never change. And we've seen that regarding JFK. They still would have Lee Oswald, even though we know Lee was in the doorway. He can't have been the lone gunman. He cannot have been one of the multiple shooters. We know with regard to 9/11, half a dozen or more of these 19 turned up alive and well and made contact with the British press. But the government's never changed its position you can go down the list for these major. And once they stake it out, they're stuck, they're locked in. That makes it very embarrassing. It means that, in fact, the government is not, with regard to events like this, a rational agent, because a rational agent, given new evidence and alternative hypotheses, would change their position, reject hypotheses they previously accepted, accept hypotheses they previously rejected, and leave others in suspense. The government does not do this. So I'm utterly convinced everything we've heard from him is 100% accurate. And it's fascinating because it offers a simpler explanation than, say, that Stanley Kubrick was brought in to do it. The points you're making about the Hollywood producers could have been, eliciting their expertise about carrying this whole thing out. So he may have consulted with them in advance of the project. Lyndon was a kind of guy. He was rather hands-on, but he was very thorough. He wasn't going to leave anything to chance. So I think what you're doing here and what you're reporting, Phil, is completely authentic. And I think you're spot on. And I think what you're doing is very important. And who, but for this research, would have abandoned LBJ had anything to do with a moon landing hoax? I mean, this just is mind-boggling.
Yes, it really is. In that September 14th blog, I just want to mention another piece of it that convinced me that it's a haunting thing to watch this other video. This is a separate video.
You want me to go?
It's in the blog after the video of Mr. Gilmore.
Okay.
This 3.5 hour film called American Moon. I just think it's incredible in so many ways. They cover so many materials.
3.5 hours, Gary. We can't
3.5 hours.
Show you
But all the way after you go through all the other material in there, the very last part of it, starting at 3 hours and 24 minutes.
Guy, yeah. Go ahead.
You want to go to 3 hours and 25 minutes?
If you go to 3 hours and 24 minutes on the timeline of that American Moon film, you'll see the focus on how the astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins themselves were put in a visible funk some months later. This is like 9 or 10 months later.
Yeah, we got it.
Recall. Okay, they were unable to explain what they felt was the historic meaning of their achievement. They stumbled, simply refused to answer the question. It's a very insightful piece of that film. Starting at that 3:24 mark. I mean, the whole video, I believe, is very, very compelling.
Right now, we're going to play that part right now.
Welcomed by
great.
In person. After a brief exchange in front of the cameras, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins are placed in quarantine for a few weeks of isolation. Then on September 16, they appear for a press conference in front of the global members of the press who welcome them with a standing ovation. Everyone expects to see three absolute heroes radiating with happiness and pride for their incredible achievement. But their faces appear somber, tense, somehow preoccupied instead. They seem uncomfortable, and there are several truly embarrassing moments during the event. When the three astronauts are asked the meaning of a mission that has brought mankind on another celestial body for the first time, the three don't seem too eager nor too enthusiastic about answering the question.
Many of us and many other people in many places have speculated on the meaning of this first landing on another body in space. Would each of you give us your estimate of what is the meaning of this to all of us?
They don't know what to say.
And when Armstrong describes their achievement as the beginning of a new era, he seems more like a person forced to read from a script than someone actually convinced of his own words.
The entire program, it's a beginning of a new age.
Right about that.
Possibly the most embarrassing moment of all comes when the famous astronomer and journalist Sir Patrick Moore asks the astronauts whether they could see stars from the moon.
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
But not one of them, surprisingly, remembers having seen a single star by the naked eye.
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics.
Even Collins, who was left orbiting the moon while the other two descended on the surface, does not remember seeing a single star.
I don't remember seeing any.
This is a truly disconcerting fact, given that their colleagues from the Gemini missions, who flew in space a few years before them, recall the long hours spent looking at the stars.
We'd spend several hours just with our faces pressed up against the window at night with all the lights turned down low and watching the stars.
Also, the astronauts from the shuttle missions, like, for example, James Riley, recall seeing literally millions of stars in outer space.
What are the stars like in space? Like, are they just brighter than on Earth, or how would you describe it?
They're brighter, but they're different. Now, a lot of things different about one, you don't have the atmospheric distortion, so they don't twinkle, right? So you see lots of points, and you see lots of points, and that literally millions of them.
One wonders where the Apollo 11 astronauts have truly been in the crucial 8 days of their mission, given that they don't remember seeing a single star by naked eye. Another surprising fact is that instead of pursuing a successful career within NASA after their triumphant mission, the three astronauts suddenly decided to leave the space agency. A little over a year after their mission, with the Apollo program still in full swing, all three astronauts resigned from NASA. Armstrong literally disappears from the scene, moves to the country, decides not to give any more interviews, and shuns the public eye. And when NASA celebrates the completion of the Apollo program, which has carried 12 men to the moon in the course of 3 years, the most important of all, Neil Armstrong refuses to take part in the ceremony. Buzz Aldrin also falls into a deep state of depression, which leads him towards the abuse of drugs and alcohol.
I thrived on addictive substances, alcoholism, and clearly that began to predominate in my unstructured life.
In 1973, he appears in a photo in Paris Match, definitely changed in his physical aspect. To the French magazine, Aldrin declares, "They think of us as heroes, but the moon has destroyed us." In a 1994 interview, Aldrin is asked to give some advice to the young people who want to become astronauts in the future. But instead of encouraging them and inspiring them with enthusiasm, he warns them against possible disappointments.
Space and its frontiers certainly are new and challenging. And because they're new and challenging, they're also uncertain. And I think anyone aspiring that as a career field has to be equipped with a lot of patience and the ability to cope with things not turning out exactly the way they may perceive that they would ahead of time.
Why would a man who has just accomplished the most important mission in the history of mankind warn young people against the risk of disappointments and failures?
Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Armstrong.
Armstrong sometimes reappears in public, but it's definitely not to sing a praise for NASA. In a ceremony hosted by Bill Clinton in 1994, Armstrong makes an ambiguous and mysterious statement. While talking to a group of students, he mentions some of truth's protective layers that young people should try to remove in order to go on.
We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
Later on, Armstrong stuns reporters again when he refuses to take part in the celebrations of the 40th anniversary of the Apollo mission. In 2004, filmmaker Bart Sibrel produces a documentary called Astronauts Gone Wild, in which he interviews the astronauts from the Apollo missions and asks them to swear on the Bible that they really have been on the moon. We must keep in mind that in the United States, a sworn testimony filmed on camera can be used in a court against the person who has made that testimony. And in the United States, perjury is a crime that can even end you up in jail. We don't know if this is the actual reason, but it's interesting to notice that once Neil Armstrong realizes he is being filmed by Sibrel's camera, he refuses to swear on the Bible.
I wanted to give you the opportunity to swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon. Will you put your left hand on the Bible and swear to God that you walked on the moon?
Gentlemen. Mr. Seibel.
Yes. If you really walked on the moon, why would you not do that? So why don't you just put the...
Even after Sibrel offers him $5,000 in cash to be given to charity, Armstrong still refuses to swear.
Yeah, $5,000 cash. You can give it to charity if you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon. I have a tape.
It'd be fine.
Why don't you swear to... Why not? Why won't you do it?
Buzz Aldrin also refuses to swear.
Why don't you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon? Why don't you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon? Why don't you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon?
Sibrel keeps insisting and even insults Aldrin until the former astronaut hits him with a punch. But at the end of the day, just like Armstrong did, Aldrin also refused to swear. Michael Collins, too, the third Apollo astronaut, refuses to swear and actually runs from Sibrel as if he had seen the devil.
Well, asking you to swear in the Bible that you orbited the moon.
Would you please go away?
Well, if you really orbited the moon, why won't you swear in the Bible that you did so? I just don't understand why if you orbited the moon, you wouldn't have a problem about swearing the Bible on it.
Sibrel certainly doesn't have a pleasant approach, but if someone has really been on the moon, why not swear anyway? All you would have needed to do to get rid of the nuisance would have been to stretch your hand out and swear on the Bible. On top, Armstrong could have given $5,000 in charity by simply performing that act. But none of the three astronauts wanted to do it. Why?
Okay, that says a lot, and it's very subjective and intuitive and all that. In other words, it doesn't come close to sworn testimony or not or anything. But how else can you look at that and not realize there's something going on underneath there that would cause that kind of reaction? Why wouldn't they swear on the Bible? Why would the question of being able to see stars on the moon or even in lunar orbit?
I always wondered about that, except when that astronaut said they sparkle in a different way. They have pointed things.
Oh, they don't sparkle at all, Gary. They're just points of light. Yeah, if you want to say they have but they don't have refraction because there's no atmosphere. So, but Phil, it's not mysterious. Their consciousness of guilt overwhelms them. They feel bad enough about it. They're not going to continue.
Yes, it's obvious in their faces that they're holding back. They don't know how to answer, how to respond to this very rather simple, basic question.
Well, listen, my understanding is the participants in the Newtown shooting were told if they had to sign non-disclosure agreements and threatened with 30 years imprisonment if they spilled the beans. Well, these guys had a far more important mission. You can imagine what penalties might await them if they were to speak the truth. They should have done it anyway, of course. But their behavior told us, spoke volumes.
Exactly. Well, anyway, that was that first the June, excuse me again. That was the September 14th. 2 weeks later, then I published the third in the series that we've discussed here. And that was entitled More Proof of LBJ's Greatest Hoax. The 1969-72 fake moon landings now deconstructed. Now, I want to point out here that I did an update to my blog just a couple of days ago, where I said, subsequent to my posting of this essay, a dear friend of mine, armed with 5 decades of study of the Apollo program, pleaded with me and sort of convinced me that the subsequent missions were real. Those completed in the aftermath of Apollo 11. He also believes that number 11 was real. but he believes that LBJ did participate in that video by Gene Gilmore. He agrees that Gilmore is a believable person, a credible person, but he only did it as a CYA, cover your ass, in case the moon landing could not be delivered. He believes that they went ahead and delivered it. I don't believe that, and
Bill,
I stand. I'm agnostic sort of as to the subsequent moon landings. He has thrown so many details to me that I cannot. I'm not in a position to evaluate. You know, and I have to defer to the fact that he has studied this for 50 years.
Phil.
However, he's not convinced me that Apollo 11 was ever real. I am convinced that at least that one was faked. And there are many reasons to believe the notion that the whole series never ever happened. But I remember watching that Apollo 11. This is right after this was actually when I was in the Peace Corps, but in Brazil, back in the late '69. And I even thought back then, and the friends that I viewed it with, that it looked fake. There's so many things about it that looked fake, but we weren't, really going to pursue it. I didn't pursue it back then. I just thought it looked fake. Well, years later, I decided, I think it really was fake. But the contrast in the previous blog said that LBJ had appeared there for only the first day. That was Gilmore, but on the other hand, he didn't actually deny that LBJ was there for the whole 3 days. Well, this latest piece of evidence indicates that he was actually there for the whole 3 days, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. So I'm not going to resolve that point, but I think that it's immaterial really, because Johnson really wanted there to be there, and however long he was there, to make sure that everyone who was involved in it saw him telling them that this is all top secret stuff. They could never utter a word about it. And anyway, in this last blog that I made, I also excerpted from the Bart Sabrell book called Moon Man, certain excerpts. I'm just going to review them, or I'm going to read them, okay? So within his book, he said that Lyndon Johnson, the US president at the time, was personally presiding over the first of 3 days of filming of this sad misadventure. This is Bart Sabrell talking, and not me. I was informed that this was set up inside two very large aircraft hangars that were coupled together to best simulate the fake landscape's enormity. The later missions likely used a similar large professional film studio somewhere, is what Bart Sabrell had said. And he also said that the Air Force Military Police described many days, even weeks of preparation before the filming was to take place. Countless tons of pulverized concrete were delivered to the military base in dump trucks, which were then used as the lunar soil, quote unquote, for the creation of the photographs and pre-filmed television images, while laboratory quality test samples of supposed lunar soil were made from crushed lunar meteorites, which had been personally retrieved from Antarctica by rocket designer Werner von Braun the previous year. The Cannon Air Force Base near Clovis, New Mexico was the location of that filming for Apollo 11, at least. It was obscure, remote, quite small, and thusly would have the fewest possible eyewitnesses. Additionally, that Air Force Base was the secretive, quote, Special Operations Command Center, end quote, for the entire United States Air Force, which is their interdepartmental equivalent of the CIA. and that the operations code name was Project Slam Dunk. Well, I think that within the video, he mentioned all the names who had been invited, but the top of the list was Lyndon Johnson. And then Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, that's Buzz, Werner von Braun, the rocket designer, Robert Emmenegger, image consultant, and so on down the list, including James Webb, the NASA administrator, and a number of other Army intelligence people and Navy representatives. In other words, the list was like 15 people. And finally, he said that he was informed that these specially equipped top secret film studios, along with all the mountain backdrops, the studio sets, as well as the film and photographic equipment, were quickly disassembled after the photography and filming was complete, so that no trace of it remained. They hauled it all back to wherever they got it from, I guess. But he ended with the statement that even the fact that President Johnson once visited Cannon Air Force Base, which at one time was had boasted about the Air Force Base's website, was his presence there was quickly removed after this investigation into the matter commenced. Well, and then I went into a number of other what I felt were pieces of the puzzle that fit, and I'm not going to go into all that, but you know, it all comes down to I believe it's very convincing that these astronauts were forced into doing what they had to do, and they were given no choice. It was just as Admiral Kidd told the crew of the Liberty: you have to shut your mouth up, zip your lip, and not say anything about this to anybody. And that's why Mr. Gilmore's father held that secret until he was on his deathbed. And then Mr. Gilmore did the same thing. And so,
Phil, you've done a wonderful job. You've done a wonderful job. I'm ecstatic about this. Completely convincing. Anyone wants more, check out. I've done several different times variations on the moon landing, how we know we didn't go. You can go to my blog at jameshfetzer.org, jameshfetzer.org, and look for JimTheConspiracyGuy.com, the 65 shows. It's about the fourth show down. And you get a massive evidence that none of these Apollo missions were bona fide. The idea that the first one was faked and the others were real is such happy horseshit. I can't believe anyone would even assert it. We didn't have the compulsion capacity to exceed low Earth orbit. We didn't have the communication capacity to communicate back and forth from the moon to Earth. We didn't have the computing capacity to navigate. We could not transit the Van Allen radiation belt. We have had subsequent spokesmen for NASA assert, and this is within the last 10 years, that the problem with a manned mission to Mars is we cannot navigate the Van Allen radiation belt. Well, if that's true now, obviously it was true in 1969, 70, and so forth. The whole thing is a monster pile of steaming shit. And what we did not know before is that LBJ was complicit. So I want to thank you, Phil, for really very fine stuff. And I think you've done a great job of piecing it together. And I commend you for all of your excellent work on this, man, one of the monsters of American history, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Gary, your final thoughts?
Yeah, it appeared to me that Mr. Gilmore was, when he was talking about his father on his deathbed, telling them things, I don't think that his father wanted him to go out and spread the word and all that. He just wanted to tell somebody. And then later on in his life, he decided that he wanted someone else to pick up the baton and roll on. Am I right about that, Phil?
yes, I think that's exactly correct. And I understand what you're saying about the subsequent supposed moon landings, and that's how I started out. And frankly, I'm still puzzled by it. But to be honest, having not studied those subsequent ones, I cannot really go one way or the other. I'm sort of agnostic because I have.
It won't take long to find out that they were all fake as you know what.
Yeah, I know. And I wouldn't be surprised if that were the
I
case.
admire you for
But-
giving this person the benefit of the doubt until you've looked into it enough to definitively say.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am right now. And until I do study it further, the problem is I've got all these other. I've got about 20 blogs I'm working on, honest to God. And but they're all somewhere around 30 or 40 or 50 or 60% complete. But that takes so much time. What I do is pales in comparison to what Jim has done on so many different fronts. It's really quite amazing, Jim. I admire you.
You can save yourself a bunch of time and go and watch those videos that he's made. Jim Fetzer's been all over the fake moon landings and stuff. So I've been convinced myself. I have really looked into it an awful lot, and I can save you a lot of research. It's fake as flocks. All right, we'll call it on that one.
All right. Well, we can resume this at some other point, and we'll see how things
We'll have
go.
you back real soon.
Thank you so much, Phil. It was wonderful.
All right.
Okay. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I hope Larry is okay. I'm very concerned about him.
Yeah, we're gonna find out. This has been
He's a great guy, and so anyway.
one of the top researchers in JFK in the world, no doubt about it. We'll find out about him. This is JFK number 275, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil.